Hi, everybody. It's Steve, and I have a special guest for you today. It's Jeff Salzman from thedailyvolver.com, a podcast and website that I frequent. Jeff is fascinating. He's an excellent conversationalist, and Jeff can explain that chart that I keep posting on my website, a chart that I keep posting because I think it's going to be an interesting conversation piece, and then it turns out I don't know what I'm talking about. It's kind of hard to explain when you don't know what you're talking about. So I went to the source of the chart, which was the dailyvolver.com website, and Jeff Salzman. And it turns out Jeff can explain the chart quite well. I think you're really going to like this episode. I really enjoyed doing it. Jeff was a great guest. It was a fun conversation. And like I said, he's fascinating. So I'm going to play a little bit of Jeff Salzman speaking in a public speaking event he was doing a couple of years ago, something I found on YouTube, just to give you a taste of why I like the Daily Evolver, why I go there all the time, and like to hear what Jeff has to say. I just think he's an interesting guy. So I'm going to play a little bit of that, and then after that, my conversation with Jeff Salzman.
It's like where you realize the kids are going to fight, that there's going to be all kinds of mayhem, that actually nothing goes really according to plan, and that people grow under their own power. And that culture and civilization grows under its own power. And so I think that one of the things that, it's like Diane was saying this morning, that one of the things we notice about evolutionary movement is that people tend to polarize against the stage that they're sick to death of. That's progress. That's an engine of evolution. So in some ways, we actually do want to push off of green. Not necessarily in an angry way, because of course green is precious. Oh my God, how could we overstate the great gifts of humanity, of pluralism and world centrism and ecology and feminism and gay rights and animal rights and all of them amazing things that green does. And I'm still mad because they're so bummed out. You know? I'm sick of it. It's bumming me out. And I see something different. And you talk about progress. Of course, you talk about progress at a Boulder dinner party, you're shouted out of the room. So I don't, but I believe it. And it's a hard one. It's a hard one to carry in the culture. I get that. I mean, how could you talk about progress when 27 people are gunned down in a school? Jesus, Lord and Almighty. 20 of them children at age 6 years old. I mean, what could be worse than that? Nothing. There's nothing worse than that. And we could go on with the details, but we all know them. And it's just, what do we say? But there actually is one thing worse than that. And that is that happening 1,000 times more often than it does. And when we look at the trajectory of history, children are living better lives than they have ever lived by dramatic. In fact, New York Times last week, infant mortality down by half in the last 20 years. Just humanity in general. More education, more communication, more technology, more kilowatts, more acres per bushels per acre, more healthcare, longer lives, more calories. These are significant. Are there still people who are left behind? Absolutely. But to me, we need a new attitude that actually is heartened and realizes that we're living in an updraft. And Steve McIntosh, you'll talk about it more later, and I love your transmission about an updraft of goodness, truth, and beauty that is just discernible.
This is Reasonably.
So I wanted to talk to you in a way that I haven't quite heard on your show, because your
Okay.
show is pretty inside baseball, sort of. I mean, it's very interesting from an outside perspective, which I am, by the way. I am not inside that baseball game. I just find it very interesting.
Cool.
And I want to I want to ask you some questions, like you were just referencing green. A lot of people don't know what that means. I know what it means because I have this chart in front of my computer screen right now. I know what you're talking about. But I want to ask you about that specifically, but a little bit later. I want to give people a little bit of a taste of what I hear in you, that I like so much. And then I want to ask you, so what is all this stuff? What's green and orange and amber and all that? But I want to ask you first, if you could just talk a little bit. I think I told you yesterday that I was watching it was a 2-year-old video of yours on YouTube, where you made, I think you called it a moral case for optimism, or a case for progress. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like just reasons why we should feel better about things in general than we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well,
Is that a hard question?
yeah, it's a great question. It just like makes me think, I like that in a question. Well, I want to go real meta here for a minute and just look at the biggest possible picture. And I would communicate it with this old joke. And that is, how do you get the complete works of Shakespeare? The answer is, you take a big mess of hydrogen and leave it alone for 13.8 billion years. Okay? And so that's what we got here. There's something going on here. There's a trajectory of, what philosophers call eros. There's a movement in history. And we actually know scientifically that this is true, because we know that the universe blasted out of nothing 13.8 billion years ago. So there's a movement, and then we see in sort of a micro view that this movement is also happening in our own lives. So then at the stage of life, we have, and this is again one of the gifts of science, we see evolution. That, atoms became molecules, molecules became cells, cells became organisms, and right up the line to us. And what Integral really focuses on is then, what is it to be a human being who is in our own individual sphere, moving that along? And we see that humanity as a whole and human beings individually move through stages of development that are very discernible in history at this point. This is one of the things we can see, because for the first time in history, we understand history. And so we could look back and feel really this fourth dimension of time that really is the echo of the Big Bang. And this gets into sort of spiritual territory that is completely scientifically vetted. Yeah. And so when we look at human history, we see that it has been a jagged, for sure, march to increasing stages of goodness, truth, and beauty. And that statement alone will get you shouted down at a Boulder dinner party.
Right.
But
why? What is the argument that those people are making when they're shouting you down?
Well, look at the pain and suffering of the world. How can you possibly say that things are getting better when XYZ is happening? And it's a good point. And indeed, we say evolution is beautiful, but it's not pretty.
Right.
And so every stage of the game is, has its perils. But what we see when we look at history again is that we are living in, when I say we, I'm talking about 6 of the 7 billion people on the planet. There's a billion who are still in abject distress. And
differentiating this helps us to actually understand and help them better. So, but for 6 out of 7 billion people, we are living lives that would be the definition of heaven to earlier humanity, where we actually have the indoors. Well, they couldn't even have imagined that for the first, couple 100,000 years of human history.
Right.
And freedom to move around, and all we could eat. In fact, our problem is too many calories. It's astonishing. That's new in human history. And so we see that there is a not only a movement in terms of economics, which is basically what I'm talking about, but also in terms of consciousness, and that consciousness evolves just as the biosphere evolves, and people move through stages of consciousness where where most people listening to this podcast, and in fact, most people who are into integral practice and integral theory, are in what we would call the green stage. And it's green in that it's ecological. It's basically what came in the 60s.
Okay.
Feminism, gay rights, animal rights, civil rights.
So this is it's a very first world thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's only so many cultures have reached that stage of development.
And then within the cultures that have reached that, only a percentage of the people living in the culture are there, true?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so currently we have 3 or 4 stages of development that are online in America, for instance.
Okay.
We have the people that I'm talking about here are the liberals, okay?
And then I will be, by the way, I'll be showing this chart that I'm looking at that I think you're referring to. I will put that up on the website so anybody can see what you're saying.
Yeah. Thank you.
So the 3 stages.
Yeah. So there's the postmodern, which is green.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're talking about here. So it's relativistic. It's often depressed. There's lots we can say about the green stage of development, but it's lost all hope in a way. So the stage before that is the modern stage of development, and this is the stage of science and technology and all of the capitalism. And this stage of development is very much online. These are kind of the moderates, the business people, the academics. Academics tend to skew green, and then there's the modernists. And secular sort of religion is not that important. And then there's the other stage, which is the previous stage, and that is the stage of traditionalism. And this is where there are a lot of conservatives, particularly the social conservatives. And these are people who are religious and nationalistic, can be ethnocentric.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of when you get to the real extremes of these are the Trump people.
Mm-hmm.
And all 3 of these are actually stages of development. Traditionalism, that's that stage that I talked about as being, what I just talked about, is that gives way to modernism, which gives way to postmodernism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a stage of development that we can see in human history, and we can also see in ourselves. So we all have all 3 of those stages online ourselves. Mm-hmm. And the realization of that.
Wait, when you say all of us?
Well, all of us who are at green have a stage that is, all of us who are at postmodern have a modern stage and a traditional stage in us. Now, they're often at war. And, this is the basic terrain of the culture wars.
Right. In
culture, too. The green postmoderns tend to look down on the traditionalists, and the traditionalists don't like the postmoderns, and the beat goes on.
It's interesting when you're talking about. I'm looking at words like progressive and conservative, and I'm just thinking about them as I'm listening to you talk about them, and wondering, those words are so liquid at this point. Like the word conservative almost has as little meaning as the word God right now, because it means something different to everyone who's saying it. Like certainly someone who calls themselves a conservative. Like there's lots of people who call themselves conservative that I think could fit in with green.
Yeah.
But they're conservative about different things. It's just so very
It's a good
difficult
point.
to talk about these things,
a good
which is
point.
why I was so anxious to have you on, because
Yeah.
I've tried to talk about it before, and I just don't quite have a grasp on this enough to sound to not be easily contradicted, I guess is what it is.
Yeah.
Like I can say the basic idea, and I love the basic the premise of it of to transcend and include what has gone before,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Like that's one sentence. Like, oh yes, I can just see like that's how life as a human being kind of functions, or at least development as a human being kind of functions.
Yeah.
But then it starts to become it's just so hard. Like because how many people would you? I don't know if you guys have figured this out yet. If there's math to it, but how does the population divide into postmodern and modern and traditional in numbers? I mean,
Yeah. It's about 30% traditional. It's about 40% modern and 30% postmodern are
Okay.
what you see. And then you also see, it's not like these are lockstep. It's like, think of a child.
yeah,
A child enters a magical world. This is also the pre-traditional, was what we would call the tribal stage of development. So, that's just put all four on the table. And for humanity at that stage, which is most of human history, the world was full of spirits and enchantment and all of that stuff. And that's a stage of childhood that is precious, And then the next stage that comes out of that is that we get civilized in a way. We go to church and we see Jesus loves us, and we join the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, and we want to be good. And so good and evil come online in a way that wasn't before. Before it was just monsters and, putting on a cape and flying and all that kind of stuff. So then we get civilized, we get good. We're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, something like that. And then we go to high school and we learn science, and then we become secular. And a lot of us went through this trajectory. We lose our religion. We, the world, all of the enchantment by this time is wrung out of the system completely. And this is true of secular culture in general, that modernist culture. And then after that, we move to Boulder and we become green because, everybody here we have this hippie tradition and we have this Buddhist thing going. And you go to all these classes and you go to sweat lodges and you dance in the woods and you take off your clothes and all of that shit. And I say that actually, it's not shit, it's good stuff. And that's sort of that, but not everybody goes through all those stages. Some people stop actually at the magic stage, at the sort of what we call a warrior stage. And then some people stop at the, they just want to be good. They continue to go to church. They never wanted the sexual revolution. They were happy with their one spouse, all that good stuff. And, so not everybody, but they do move in an order. And that's important because that's the evolutionary thing. Because what's true about each of them is able to see more of reality.
So you're saying that all of these stages are open to us in a single lifetime? It's a matter of whether you take it or not, or?
Well, it's just a matter of who knows. I mean, it's actually one of the mysteries, is why some people continue to develop and some people don't. And actually, if I may, I want to add the next stage, which is the one that's after postmodern, which is integral. And integral is the stage that we're talking about. We see this as the next stage of development. And part of what integral does is it befriends everybody at all the previous stages and doesn't really see that it's their responsibility to change them, because Eros itself is changing them, because 3-year-olds grow into 4-year-olds, grow into 12-year-olds, grow into 18-year-olds, and that's just the way it is. I mean, growth is built into the system. So, from an integral perspective, you want to see the value of all of these stages. I mean, what's not to like about having an enchanted world?
Right.
What we want to bring that back online. So what's not to like about having a mythic world, a world where, you're here to be obedient and dignified and, all of these wonderful gifts of traditionalism and good, be a good person, be a good citizen.
That was an interesting thing that you just said. We want to bring that back online.
Yes.
So do you mean like
That's key.
bring the good parts of it back online?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And are you talking about for society or for the individual?
Well, we do it as individuals, for sure, if we're interested. Some people aren't, and they just stay where they are, and that's beautiful too, because they, whatever. So, but for those who are seekers, who just want to keep going, it just, it feels like every stage feels like you're you're a new person, a new you. Right. You are, actually. You have a new world space. There's more space. There's more life open to you now. And that is big. And the move to integral is where integral really starts seeing this evolutionary thing. They see that this system not only exists, but it's like Walt Whitman said, it's alive.
Mm-hmm.
I
can see myself in little bits and pieces of all of these levels. Like I was looking all the way down to archaic, and I was thinking I've recently become a fan of The Walking Dead, and I've been binge watching the show.
I love it too.
And those people have found themselves in this situation that's not unlike, as it says here, 250,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And they are all about survival, instinct, intuition, oriented to short-term safety.
Yep.
And all of the moral decisions that they face on the show are trying to reintegrate this archaic infrared level into their postmodern selves.
Right. Yes. Hallelujah. Well said.
That's fascinating, but how do I explain that to someone who's not part of this conversation right now?
I know, really.
Or here's a better question. If I am trying to explain that to someone, what is the value of it for them to understand that?
Well,
what's the value of it for me to understand that? What just happened to me just now? What did I just get by making that connection?
Yeah. Well, the integral view, and we have maps in the integral movement, if you will, of like these stages of development that we've been talking about. These are anthropologists and psychologists and people have identified them. There's Maslow, there's Gene Gebser, there's this is well established science that these stages happen, and we have other maps of reality like interiors and exteriors and so forth, and it's a little complicated. People either like it or they don't. But what does happen, and you don't have to use the maps for this to happen, but the move to integral feels psychoactive in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why. That's why you want to do it, if you want to do it. Now, you can't make other people want to do it, and nor should you. That's one of the insights of integral. All of these earlier stages think that they're the only ones who are right.
Right.
And so they're trying to colonize all the other stages, which is why we have so much war and, strife.
Right.
And even politically, all of that. And that's not even, that just seems to be the way that, the world is set up. So I'm not complaining. I mean, growing up as a human being is painful, but it's also beautiful. Mm-hmm. But any given day, it's, especially if you're not aware of the bigger picture, it can just be a slog.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of people see the history of humanity. It is actually, I always like the Mark Twain line. It's one goddamn thing after the next.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see that is the history of just like the last couple of weeks. I mean,
Well, yes.
like
Yeah, thank
because
you.
I think that I would be, if we broke me down, I think I'm postmodern green, but I find myself fighting with people who are also postmodern green because
Yeah.
I'm right and they're wrong, and they think that they're right and I'm wrong, and
Right.
it becomes very frustrating because it's just it isn't that they don't have a point, it's that they're talking about something different and I'm talking about something different,
Yeah,
and we're
exactly.
not connecting.
Yeah.
I mean, the election is making this really loud,
Yeah.
and kind of disconcerting, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I don't even feel like I'm fighting with anybody in another tier.
Yeah.
I'm fighting with the ones that are supposed to be agreeing with me.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, about, well, I don't want to talk about politics,
Right.
but
Fair enough.
it it's it begins to be arguments about minutia,
Yeah.
But there was something else that I wanted to say, and then I started thinking about politics and got really angry. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, what I'd say about what you were talking about a minute ago is that, we when you move beyond the postmodern grip into more of an integral, open, flexible, they call it flex flow mind. That's sort of the psychological, moniker. When you do that, you are able to be with people at any stage.
Yes.
In a way they call it being a universal donor. So your job is no longer to correct them, or unless you want to. I mean, you can have a good argument's fun, but you're not so attached to it anymore because
Right.
it's not your responsibility, and you're not as gripped. You can breathe. It's like you appreciate them. You see what piece of the truth they have.
Right.
You make it a point to learn something from them. Maybe they're not going to learn something from you, which was what you thought your project was, but make it your project to learn something from them. I mean, it just changes things up in a way that opens the space and, lets the system breathe. And that's a big difference from the postmodern green and all the previous stages.
And I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm looking at all these levels and just seeing like that I kind of bounce around in between them.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the, in fact, just quickly, that's one of the markers of integral consciousness is that you're actually in contact. You want to bring the best of all of them online. So you actually are moving from perspective to perspective or world space to world space. And that's okay. Not only is it okay, it's like fun.
Right. But so it's fun, and talking with you about this is fun because you know more about it than I do. Talking with somebody else about this who, I mean, I'm first of all, I'm certainly not an expert on this, but I know what it is, right?
Yeah.
I've got the chart. When I talk about it, I bump up right away against something that, wow, if I keep talking about this, it starts to sound kind of insulting. Because in order to be able to talk about it at all, I have to kind of put myself up at the higher edge of this chart.
Yeah.
So if I'm explaining it to somebody who doesn't know what this is, it's like, well, people like you who are in traditional amber,
Right.
like
you're 3 stages down from me.
right. And I
I
don't
so
know.
I
I
want
don't
you to
even know
see
that
this
that's
chart so that I could prove it to you.
right. I don't even
Yeah.
know that it's true that they're 3 stages down for me, but the conversation comes out that way.
Right.
How does that work? Or is it maybe because it's, I guess one thing that I like about, or another thing that I like about what you do is there's nothing evangelical about it. You're just talking about it. And if people are interested in what you're saying, they can keep listening. Or
That's
they
right.
can call you and ask you to be on their podcast.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the answer to the question is I don't proselytize it, but I sort of occasionally will try to skillfully offer it, and if people bite, that's good. But for the most part, well, first of all, I spent the first 10 years of my sort of integral, what I getting into this whole thing, shoving books down people's throats and wanting to talk to people and fighting with people and arguing with them about it. I mean, I did all that. And I realized I really got very little progress. I mean, it was astonishing considering how fantastic this is. It's like, I'm like telling people that if you accept Jesus as your personal, this is my, this another version. It actually is.
Yeah.
People being saved, that is a big move up.
Right.
Into, that traditionalism, which is, we all do it, or many of us do. So integral has that same feeling. It's like, oh my God, you have to do this.
Right.
But then it just doesn't work. So, fortunately, we've developed in the last, really just 10 or 15 years, an integral community of people who, are interested enough to read a Ken Wilber book, and that's Wilber. And he is the leading integral philosopher these days, and Steve McIntosh, another one. There's a whole thing here.
Let me ask you this, because first of all, yes, I should say, your website is dailyevolver.com. That's the one that I'm referring to, that I'm saying that I listen to it a lot and really like it. What would you say for the dailyevolver.com? What is the mission of your website? There's a great podcast on it. There's a blog.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at current events. So, I like to talk politics. I'm good with politics. I talk politics and religion, basically.
You're great with politics, by the way.
Thank you.
You've said some things like when you were talking about how you were using Ted Cruz as sort of like a mission, not a mission, but like a task for yourself to try to.
It was a mission. Yeah.
That was I couldn't quite handle that one, but I was fascinated with it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't think I can do that. But it did open my mind up a little bit.
Yeah, it stretched me, and that's the point. But what he's talking about is this integral practice I did of befriending Ted Cruz because I had such resistance to him. And, this is just good psychology kind of practice, but it does open up the space. And so, you actually practice. Once you realize that you are an evolving human being and you have the opportunity to direct and participate in your own evolution, that's one of the realizations that we get when we understand evolution, consciousness evolution, then you are either called to it or you aren't. And so, fortunately, there's enough people who are, that there's a center of gravity of people who are able to talk about this and,
it's an excellent way to do it. In fact, I think it's probably the only way to do it for what you guys are doing, because it's challenging. I mean, and I mean that like challenging, it's almost confrontational to yourself. Like just looking at it, I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm going to have to rank myself, I see. So, all right, where do I fit in this ranking?
No,
but
it's true.
The effect that it has...
go on.
If I may, the effect that it has is it's kind of like there's an interesting conversation going on the other side of a door, and you've left the door open. So, I something led me to that site at some point, and I don't remember what, but I saw it, and I think maybe I knew who Ken Wilber was. Maybe I was searching Ken Wilber or something like that, and I came across your site, and I listened to it, and I was like, okay, that was really interesting, because this guy, Jeff Salzman, no offense to Ken Wilber, but you're a lot more accessible. You're Ken Wilber's very, very detail oriented, and it can be it's a deeper dive maybe, I guess. But anyway, the point is, I listened to you and I was like, hey, that was pretty cool. And then I walked back out the door again, right, and went on about my life, and then. Oh, there's another interesting conversation. Oh, that's that guy again. And it's in other words, not proselytizing at all, just simply being interesting and consistently being interesting. And then I keep going through the door, and then I'm like, you know what? I would love to learn more about this. I want to. Yeah. And I also I want anybody who's listening to my podcast also to feel that this is an interesting door. Go to dailyevolver.com. And take a look. They're not going to ask you to do anything. Well, actually, how would you describe it? Is it a philosophy? It's not a religion, of course.
It is. No, it's a philosophy. What we're trying to do is integrate all of human wisdom. So that's a big thing. But what is true about the stage of development that we're at, particularly in the first world, is that we, for the first time in history, have all of human wisdom available to us.
Mm-hmm.
I can read any book of any great teacher in history. I can go and study in a lineage that is foreign to my background. I can read philosophers. I can go back to prehistory. I can go east and west. I can do philosophy and science and music and art. And so we can actually lay all of this out on the table.
Yeah.
And see, where are the patterns here? What's actually, because we know that this is a moving system, because we see it. We see that, humanity moved from magic to mythic to rational to pluralistic, just as each individual human being does, to the degree that they go there. And so there's no reason that should stop. And so what's the next stage? And, what we think it is this deep friendliness, which is happening naturally to all perspectives, and just sort of a basic faith proposition that everyone has a piece of the truth, that every human being has something that is precious, that we actually is available for us to appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And so that itself becomes a practice.
That's something precious. I'm sorry.
Ted Cruz, even with people like Ted Cruz,
right?
Yeah. Or Donald Trump, my new guy.
That thing that's inside that you said that it's a piece of the truth, but you're talking about some kind of connection. You're talking about some kind of spiritual connection to the source of all things, or to God, or something like that.
Yes.
And one thing I think I want to,
and I use that term advisedly because God has such freight. Forget baggage; it's got like a boxcar. But what we're talking about is just, bringing back that magical child in a way that sees, we don't know. I don't know the actual ontology of who's created it and how it worked, whatever, or if anybody did. But I do know that if I have if I can contact my magical strata that's already there and just been in the shadow, that life is enchanted. And that's my spiritual practice. I mean, I could play with that forever,
Okay, so now you're hitting on something that makes a lot of sense, but I wasn't getting before, which is you're now using words from the tribal magenta stage.
Yes.
As if that's an end goal.
Well, one of the goals of Integral is to recontact that in our own mind body.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's there. And we actually lived through it. I mean, we had our magical stage 2, where the world was full of spirits, and it's not completely, I don't want to overstate it, but there's a recapitulation there that we can appreciate ourselves, and we lose that. It's part of the growing up. Growing up ain't pretty,
Right.
We lose our enchantment, we lose our magic, but at some point some people don't, there's actually those people too, and they're sort of guides in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But for the rest of us, we can intentionally and as a practice bring it back.
Right. Well, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying, which is
Bring it forward.
I guess that's sort of been a stumbling block to me for Integral, is because I didn't understand that what you just said was part of what you guys do. Because I do think that's very, very important, and I feel like this chart is espousing leaving that behind.
No. Quite the contrary. Yeah. No. The Integral. Every stage wants to. All the first 6 stages want to leave the rest behind because they think, okay, finally we got it.
Right.
And then, when we got to modernity, it's like, wow, we really got it here. I mean, we got science, we can build the indoors, we
Right.
got education, all of this good stuff. But our moral development hadn't really caught up. And so we still had a sort of an ethnocentric thing going on. And so we ended up with this conflagration of the mid 20th century, with the two world wars and the, Holocaust and the starvations and all of that sort of thing. And that sort of brought on the postmodern worldview. And the postmodern worldview is the first one to say, forget all your truth claims. Look where they got us. Your religion, your nationalism, fuck you. Fuck you. That's one of the big, all your structures, all your ideas, all your hierarchies. Fuck you with your hierarchies.
Yeah, that's me. That's my attitude.
Absolutely. And that's a stage of the development that is important because we want to lose those kinds of dominator hierarchies. And, we have to wipe the slate clean of them so that we can then see that there are natural hierarchies that we want to start re-embracing.
So are we seeing then, is there a revelation at this stage that the magical aspects of life have been repressed?
Yes, absolutely.
So you're skipping over, when looking backwards from postmodern green, you're skipping over orange and amber and red and going straight to magenta and saying, but there's a valuable diamond at the bottom of that well that we need to get back.
That's right.
Which, of course, now we're talking about mythology and diving into wells and recovering sacred items that are lost.
Yeah, and not gripping around the storyline so much as finding for us as 21st century human beings just the magic, just the part where life wants us to be here. We belong here. We're on a journey. What we do matters. Every person we meet is like somebody we met in a fairy tale. They all have some little something.
Yeah.
Just re-enchanting our lives. So, we do that. I mean, we're such whores, in Integral. I mean, we'll do any practice because, and we'll believe anything for, the weekend, whatever. Because, we're not looking, we know that, we're trying, and not just are we bypassing amber and, the other stages. We want actually to do the same thing in every stage. What is the beauty of the traditional stage that we want to fully have online?
Right.
This family and whatever. I don't know.
Discipline.
Yes, discipline. Being good. That there is that this world is not our home. That we have some sort of a transpersonal identity that is tied to the source. That we are seen and loved. Well, I say by God. I sit in the lap of my grandmother. Whatever. Mm-hmm. But we are precious and loved by Almighty God or Goddess or whoever.
Right.
And that's important. So then we want to move to the modern stage where we want to realize that the world is knowable and I can just get out there and I can do my thing and I can express myself and I am special and I have a gift and I want to achieve and I want to, that kind of stuff. And that tends to want to throw away all the religion. Mm-hmm. It does. It's supposed to, actually. I mean, I'm not complaining. I mean, it's like I said, it's not pretty. It's not pretty growing up as a teenager either.
Right.
But this seems to be the way God set it up. So we can either, be friendly to the system or not.
What you're just saying I like when you compare it to childhood, teenager, adulthood, because you can very much see the development of humanity in microcosm and the development of each individual person.
Well said.
Because you can also see the development, or not the development, you can see the arguments that we have globally in the arguments that we had in high school with one person.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you see how all of our friends, how when we were in first grade, we were all alike. Mm-hmm. And just as early people, they didn't have to worry about personalities. They didn't have them that much. And tribal is not even full egos online. You have such a collective. That's the other wonderful thing about that tribal stage is we also want that kind of connected liquid space between us.
Right.
To have those kinds of deep relationship that, we tend to get alienated when we go to the modern stage.
Right.
So, that's another thing we want to, recover.
Going back again to that transcend and include what has gone before.
Yes.
So it's development, and every time you as an individual or we as a species move, or maybe not as a species, but even as like a bunch of people can do this and then eventually sort of drag the species along with it.
Yeah.
Every time you move from one stage to the next, you have transcended the one, but you include it. You've still
Yes.
got it. You still understand it.
Yes.
And then I remember another thing that you said that I thought was interesting was you said people tend to polarize against the stage that they're sick to death of.
Yeah.
So you transcend
bored.
one and then probably tend to at least temporarily despise the one that you just moved out of.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
eventually you should be able to say, you know what? I'm not really that angry at my grandfather or whatever. He's really a great man. I just had a problem with him when I was 16.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And
That's beautiful.
it is. Yeah, it absolutely is.
It's
And-
rational. It's very science-y, but it's
Yeah.
also, it feels spiritual. It feels like a way for a modern person who craves that lost sense of spirituality to go, I don't have to throw out rationality to feel that way.
No. Absolutely. In fact, rationality, science gives us this fucking amazing creation story. Something blew out of nothing and turned into us and our, iPhones.
Right. What is it? Terence McKenna says, scientists say, just give me one miracle and I can explain the universe.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one miracle after the next.
No,
And
just
that's
one. Just one at the beginning. We can
Yeah.
explain everything.
I know. And then we get one lousy miracle out of these scientists. But that stage of the game, science works with the material world. It ought to get rid of all superstition, all of these, supernatural explanations. That's not their job.
Right.
And that's new in history. And it's new, when you go to high school.
Right.
That you learn that, and that just opens up a whole new world. And part of what makes that work is that you do want to wring all of the religion and all of that other horse shit out of the system.
Right.
And just look at this thing and just see how it's working. And but that's where a lot of people are. That's where a lot of our culture is, where there's allergies to anything that's spiritual because they can't see or don't see that there's a spirit beyond secularism. There's a stage beyond secularism and materialism where spirit gets reintegrated. They see that as a regression of going back
Right.
to, earlier stages. And that's you're always sort of fighting that. And that's why one of the sort of engines of evolution is when we just get sick of the way we're thinking. It's just not working anymore.
What is the postmodern attitude towards that spiritual aspect, the
Well,
magical aspect?
Postmodern brings the magic, starts bringing the magic back, very much so. And so that is why, when you get into postmodern culture, well, there's psychedelics.
Yeah.
For one thing, that's a very powerful way of seeing this sort of, these transpersonal states. But also what I talked about with Boulder, you go drumming in the woods and you do the, vision quests, whatever. And there's a sort of cafeteria of different things. And that's a wonderful new stage of development. And so people get opened up again. They move beyond materialism where they can see that there is actually other forces, even though you can't, measure them like you can measure, electricity. But they're there. There's a consciousness. There's something alive. There's something going on.
They're sensible sensible meaning they can be sensed.
Yes.
And they are measurable in some way, but they're there.
Yeah, they just have different validation claims, different ways of validating them.
So postmodern is kind of trying to invent new ways to reopen old
Yes.
pathways,
Yes.
old. What am I looking for? The word I'm looking for: capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the postmodern culture, the green culture, is also this great a rising of therapy. It's the therapeutic culture. So lots of psychotherapies and different modalities of basically introspection. This is the stage that gets very introspective, which is why it's often accused of being narcissistic. I think that's a bum rap. But because part of what happens is we start noticing our own interiors. We feel our energy bodies. We start doing yoga. We start doing, lucid dreaming, whatever.
Yeah.
And so this new world opens up. And that is included in the next stage of integral.
Well, I mean, so if it's seen as narcissistic, I mean, again, looking at the chart from a traditional or a modernist perspective, it is narcissistic.
Absolutely.
So,
That's right.
so going back to the very first thing that we were talking about, what is the pie chart division of, like, say, American society of how many greens, how many orange, and how many ambers are there?
Well, like I said, green is maybe 25, 30%.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's a big middle there with the people who are modern. And again, people have both green and orange tendencies, or green and modern tendencies, and so it's not like you move lockstep. But just center of gravity wise, 30% green, 30. What would that be? 40%.
70 would be left.
Yeah, 40% modern, and then 30% traditional, and some people who are pre-traditional.
How was that determined?
Through smart people thinking about
Okay.
it.
That's good enough.
It's a guess.
That's
It's a
good
guess.
enough. Right.
It's a guess. Yeah. There have been some research done on it that comes up with similar kind of things.
It seems to me that there's a lot of bleed over particularly between green and orange.
Yeah, totally, absolutely, and also green and integral. And I should also say that and there has been good research about this, that 4 to 5% of the population of developed countries are integral, and moving into that territory, and that is.
I'm sorry, say that again. 45%.
No, 4 to 5.
Oh, 4 to 5%.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that there's a leading edge into the integral stage that is just coming online now, just beginning to.
Now, one thing that seems to happen in this chart is things seem to accelerate also as the change starts to happen faster.
Yeah.
5,000 years of traditional, 500 years of modernist, and then 100 years of green, and we're already at 30%.
Yeah, exactly. No, evolution accelerates. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we were tribal for, 40,000 years,
Right.
and pre-tribal for a couple 100,000 years, and then the 10th commandment comes along about 4,000 years ago, and and then we move into modernities about 400 or 500 years, since the scientific revolution, and then the next stage, the postmodern, comes online 50 or 60 years ago. So yeah, and that's why we have now people like us who actually inhabit a number of stages. There's, back in the early days, there was only one stage online. Everybody was tribal.
Right.
Period. So that's happening too, and that's part of the frothy edge of evolution, consciousness evolution, that is just fascinating. And so you see, what is it? What's it feel like? What do you see? What's this new territory? And I often, if I may, am moved to share this one verse from Walt Whitman from Song of Myself,
Please.
Which I think captures it. And he says, "Gently, but with undeniable strength, divesting myself of the holds that would hold me, I inhale great drafts of space. The north and the south are mine, and the east and the west are mine. I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness. All seems beautiful to me. And he goes on, it's as beautiful as that. But that has that sort of texture of integral. And throughout history, there have been people who have spiked to higher levels. These are saints and sages. We sort of recognize them. And, Jesus was one, Buddha was one. I mean, these people, they come in with this high, 2 or 3 stages, next level teachings. And of course, they're, people gravitate to them. We can't help ourselves. But we, sort of implement them at the stage we're at.
Right.
So, but that's the feeling. Just this radical new friendliness to the world, and also the realization that this system is alive, and I'm a part of it. I'm embedded in it.
Yeah.
And that I am being lived by it as much as I am living it myself. And there's a relaxation that happens there that is, just delicious.
That seems like a good place to end this. We're also coincidentally coming up about time where you would have to go.
Yeah, cool.
This is fantastic. I wanted to ask you, is there something that I should ask you before I let you go? Do you feel like we've covered it?
There is actually, and that is that this idea of elitism. And when you talk about this, it's insulting to
yeah.
And it is actually one of the sort of crosses to bear a little bit. It's like, but at some point you have to think that if I see this system and I see that I have an ability to see it, that I actually have to stand up. There's a certain red quality that comes in. This is sort of that warrior or those earlier stages in this magical stage, where I have to stake my claim and see that there is a natural hierarchy of consciousness development, and that people at higher stages are more responsible for the system that people are that previous stages are, and that it is an elitism to which everybody is invited. There's nothing other than the growth from an acorn to a seedling to a sapling to an oak. There's a stage where you move in a certain direction, and that there's, on one hand, you don't want to be coy about it, and on the other hand, you don't want to be arrogant about it, which is why, in a certain way, it becomes not a secret society like early modernists had to have. I mean, they got their heads cut off if they were found out or burned at the stake.
Right.
Fortunately, we don't have that. But, some of these new stages come in sort of bubbles and, closed systems, and that's okay. So I don't know if that answers some of that, but it is a dilemma of saying that there's a natural hierarchy and here I am at the top of it. But there's the other thing I would say is that there's no top. It keeps going. We are where we are. And I have, a certain integral consciousness that I would claim, but I also have dimensions of Jeff that are all over the map,
Right.
that, I don't want to talk about. Thank you very much. So,
Yeah, I would say
where the whole catastrophe is online.
Yes, clearly. I mean, 'cause on a good day, I can see some of this green in me, but most of the time I'm egocentric, aggressive, and exploitative.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Me too.
And on that note,
Yes.
thank you so much for coming on the show.